A black woman in a cleaning uniform answered her phone in fluent Dutch. Within seconds, the lobby froze. Not because of her words, but because brilliance wasn't supposed to wear gloves and carry bleach. She was scrubbing the marble floor of a $500 a night hotel when the call came. Spanish, fast, academic. No one noticed her voice. They never see the janitor. Not here, not in America. But Daniel Walker did. The CEO froze mid-step. It wasn't just the language. It was the weight behind it. The sound of a mind sharper than the boardroom she wasn't allowed in. Elena Reyes didn't know she was being watched, only that her hands reeked of bleach and dreams were dangerous where she stood. One wrong move and she'd be back in the basement. That's what happens to the daughters of immigrants, to women whose mothers cleaned houses so they could chase degrees, only to mop floors again. This isn't about one hotel, it's about a country that forgets who built it, and a voice, uninvited, unpolished, about to remind it. She moved like a whisper across the gleaming lobby, a bottle of industrial-grade cleaner in one hand and a bucket in the other. No one looked at her. No one ever did. That was the point. She was part of the architecture, neutral, invisible, expected to remain silent unless spoken to, and even then, preferably with her eyes down. Elena Reyes had worked at the Argent, a luxury hotel perched like a throne over the city, for 6 years. But in all that time, she had never really existed inside its walls. She wore her uniform like armor. It shielded her degree, her fluency in 5 languages, her late-night translations for non-profit groups, and her unpaid research on cultural linguistics. The patch on her chest read housekeeping, but the papers, framed in cheap plastic, in her cramped apartment told a different story. Her mother's hands had scrubbed floors too, back in Texas, then Arizona, then back again when the landlords changed their minds. Elena had sworn that her life would be different, but every morning she tied her hair back, clocked in before dawn, and pushed the same cart down the same corridors where guests tossed towels on marble like royalty. That morning, the lobby was silent in the way that only money can buy. Fresh orchids had just arrived. A pianist, imported from Vienna, played unobtrusively near the window. The scent of lavender and lemon polish hovered in the air, and Elena, knees stiff from scrubbing tile, was just about to finish the last corner when her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She shouldn't have answered. Rule number 1 from Mr. Parker, her floor manager. No phones on shift, especially not for staff below reception level. But when Elena saw the caller ID, Crestview University, admissions office, her breath caught. Her heart didn't beat faster. It just stopped, cold and still, like it knew that this moment had been waiting 6 years to arrive. She glanced around. No one was watching. Or so she thought. She stepped behind a massive bronze column, turned her back to the front desk, and answered in a low voice, her tone composed, her soul trembling. Elena Reyes speaking. The voice on the other end was warm, professional, and spoke fluent Spanish. Señorita Reyes, this is Dr. Santiago Rivera. I'm calling regarding your application for the Cultural Studies graduate program. The rest faded. Not because it didn't matter, but because it mattered too much. Elena replied in perfect Spanish, her cadence natural, her grammar precise. They spoke for less than a minute, but each word landed like a prayer spoken aloud. That's when it happened. The music stopped. Not the piano, not literally, but something in the air shifted. She felt it. A stillness. A tightening. She turned slowly. Standing a few feet away was a man in a charcoal suit, his hands in his pockets, his gaze locked on her, not with malice, but with sharp, surgical curiosity. He didn't blink. He didn't smile. Daniel Walker, the 48-year-old CEO of Walker International Hospitality Group, had just watched a janitor speak fluent Spanish with academic poise, using terms that would confuse half the hotel's upper management. Beside him stood Mr. Parker, arms crossed, eyes already narrowing, the edge of accusation curling at the corners of his mouth. Elena ended the call quickly. "I'll follow up shortly. Thank you, doctor," she whispered. Then louder to the lobby. "Yes, Mr. Parker?" What followed wasn't fire. It was ice. Parker didn't shout. He didn't need to. His words dripped condescension. "You know the rules, Lopez." "Elena," she corrected automatically. He ignored her. "We'll talk downstairs." As she followed him to the basement-level office, she didn't feel shame. She felt fury. Not the loud kind. The kind that settles deep, behind the ribs, where it waits. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that in the lobby above, Daniel Walker was already asking questions. Who was that woman? Why had he never seen her resume? And why the hell had someone with that voice been scrubbing floors for 6 years? He didn't know her story yet, but he'd just heard enough to suspect that the system he'd spent decades building was broken, and that the first crack had just spoken in Spanish, and it would not be silenced. The elevator ride to the top floor felt like being lifted out of a world that had always rejected her. Elena Reyes had never been past the 12th floor, not as a guest, not even for a cleaning shift. Now the elevator purred upward in silence, the numbers blinking slowly like the passing years she had spent being ignored, overlooked, and kept beneath the glass ceiling someone had laid directly on the marble floor she scrubbed every morning. Her shoes, still damp from disinfectant, made no sound on the executive carpet. The doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing a hallway of quiet power, polished wood, abstract art, the kind of silence that comes at a cost. At the far end, a glass wall framed the city like a portrait. In front of it stood Daniel Walker, arms folded, looking out over everything he'd built. She walked toward him, heart pounding in her throat. He didn't turn right away. "Elena Reyes," he said, voice calm, low, unreadable. "You have a degree in linguistics and are fluent in 5 languages. Top of your class at Eastlake College, 2 publications, 6 years of experience in this hotel." Now he turned, eyes sharp, tone almost disbelieving. "And no one ever offered you a position outside of janitorial services?" Elena didn't speak. He waited. She knew this game, how silence could be used to control a room. But this time, it wasn't silence she feared. It was the weight of finally being seen. "I applied," she said evenly. 47 times. 12 internal transfer requests. All unanswered. "Blocked?" Walker asked. She nodded. "By Parker. And Gallagher." He scribbled both names in a small leather-bound notebook, then looked up. "Gallagher's been complaining for years about a lack of qualified multilingual staff for our international clients," Walker said, as if hearing his hypocrisy in real time. "So why was your resume never forwarded to me? Why were you never interviewed?" He already knew the answer, but sometimes asking the obvious was the only way to confront the rot. "I guess I didn't fit the profile," Elena replied, her voice steady, too brown, too smart, too quiet for people who need noise to notice something. Walker's jaw flexed slightly, but he said nothing. A moment passed, then he handed her a folder. "Tomorrow, we're hosting a joint summit between Chinese and Spanish executives. A dozen delegates, 2 languages, and more egos than translators can manage. I want you to serve as our temporary international communications liaison." Elena blinked. "Sir, I don't—" "You do," he cut in gently but firmly. "You've already proven you know the languages. What I need now is proof you can handle the politics." "And if I can't?" she asked. "You go back to the basement," he said, not unkindly. "But something tells me you won't be going back." Elena opened the folder. It contained a formal appointment letter, temporary access to the hotel's internal systems, and, she blinked again, a contract, $5,000 per week. Her knees almost gave out. That was more than she made in 3 months scrubbing baseboards and bleaching toilets. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply exhaled once, deeply, like someone who had been holding their breath for years. "Why me?" she whispered. Daniel Walker walked around the desk, then leaned on it, arms crossed. "Because I heard you speak like someone who should be leading the room, not cleaning it. Because your name has sat in a drawer for 6 years while the company burned money on contractors who can't even conjugate, and because I think this hotel, this entire system, has been quietly burying its best people. You're the first name I've pulled out, but you won't be the last." She nodded once. Not because she was ready, but because she had never been given the chance to be. As she left the office, appointment letter in hand, something shifted in the hallway outside. Executives passed her, but this time, they looked. Not down, not away, at her. And for the first time in 6 years, Elena Reyes walked back into the elevator, not as someone being summoned, but as someone finally being chosen. The next morning, Elena Reyes stepped into the executive hallway wearing the same black, slip-resistant shoes she'd polished every night for 6 years. Her uniform had changed, but only just. A crisp navy blouse tucked into high-waisted slacks replaced the polyester housekeeping tunic. Around her neck, instead of a passkey, now hung a badge clipped in gold. International Communications Liaison. Temporary access. But the air around her hadn't caught up yet. People still looked through her, then looked again. She passed the security desk, where the guard she greeted daily now froze and double-checked her badge with suspicion. She passed a junior manager who instinctively shifted his briefcase to the opposite hand as if she might try to take it. The front desk receptionist, a white woman in pearls and pastel, offered a brittle smile that trembled when Elena met her eyes directly. That was the thing about crossing lines in America. You don't just get promoted. You get questioned. You get watched. Elena entered the conference room where she would translate between Chinese and Spanish business leaders, all seated at a polished mahogany table that stretched like a runway across the room. But she hadn't even opened her laptop before she noticed the glances, not from the delegates, but from the hotel's staff. They weren't subtle. She heard it in the way Parker whispered to another supervisor as she walked by. "Is that one of the interns?" She saw it in the way an older executive leaned over to ask, "Is she with catering?" And she felt it most deeply through the silence. The air got thinner when she entered. The way no one sat beside her at the long table until Walker arrived. America doesn't always scream its prejudices. Sometimes it just rearranges the room, leaving you standing. That morning she wore navy instead of gray. But her skin didn't change. Her earrings, small gold hoops, were suddenly unprofessional, in a space full of white men in paisley ties, and Rolex watches big enough to fund a semester of her college tuition. One woman's Chanel brooch was called elegant. Elena's thrift store scarf, tucked neatly over her collarbone, was described in a whisper as loud. The irony was brutal. When she was silent in a cleaning uniform, she was harmless. When she spoke multiple languages with authority, she became threatening. Elena had learned to navigate rooms like this the way her mother navigated grocery stores in the 1980s, smiling gently, speaking softly, and carrying proof of identity. Always, always have proof. And yet, here she was. Not because she asked for permission, but because someone in power had finally seen that her excellence didn't need translating. She turned to the projector, reviewed the translated briefing packets, and immediately spotted a potential disaster. One sentence in the Mandarin version of the welcome note had used a term that, in Western business English, might pass unnoticed, but in Chinese, it implied subservience, even humiliation. Another translated a common Spanish idiom too literally, turning a compliment into a veiled insult. She didn't panic. She didn't flinch. She calmly opened a notepad and began rewriting the passages by hand. That's when she saw Mr. Gallagher watching her, He was older, pressed suit, ivory cufflinks, a man who spoke about diversity in memos but never in meetings. His niece ran the translation firm that had butchered these documents. Elena knew that. So did Sarah Martinez in HR. But no one had said it out loud. Not yet. Gallagher leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Everything all right, Ms. Reyes?" Elena didn't look up. "It will be." Behind her, Daniel Walker had just walked in and said nothing but took his place beside her silently. It was a quiet moment, but every person in the room felt it shift, because something dangerous was happening. Not loud, not violent, but undeniable. A woman of color, once considered invisible, was rewriting the very language this company used to speak to the world, and she wasn't asking permission. She was correcting mistakes. That day, Elena didn't just wear a new badge. She wore the weight of generations who'd been told that their names, their accents, their accessories, their silence, or their voice didn't belong here. But now, she was the one who would translate the future. And every word carried the gravity of history. She found the final proof buried in a folder stamped, "Internal use only." Not in red ink, not in handwritten notes, but in numbers, clean and cold. A spreadsheet listing contract payments to a boutique translation firm, tens of thousands of dollars for services riddled with errors. The name on the vendor account is Whitmore Language Solutions. The registered owner is Ashley Whitmore. No degrees, no certifications, no qualifications except one. She was Mr. Gallagher's niece. Elena Reyes sat in the staff resource room, back straight, heart pacing like a drumline buried under a suit jacket she still wasn't sure she was allowed to wear. Her badge hung at eye level now, international liaison, but old habits don't fade quickly. She still whispered in rooms with carpets. Still, it was moved like an apology. Still watched the way people looked at her earrings before they looked at her resume. But this wasn't about whispers anymore. This was theft, discrimination disguised as family discounts and policy loopholes. Outside the glass window, the skyline pulsed in the morning sun. But inside the hotel, Elena felt something colder. Not rage, not even betrayal. It's just a bone-deep recognition. The kind of job her mother must have thought of in the late 70s, when she applied to 5 receptionist jobs and was offered one, was to clean the floors instead. The type of feeling her grandmother felt when she stood behind a cash register and was told not to speak Spanish because it made the customers uncomfortable. Elena printed the documents. Next came the emails. Polite follow-ups, rejections, and interviews canceled the moment she walked in. 47 versions of, "We'll keep your resume on file." All of it documented. All of it was ignored. She sent them to Sarah Martinez in HR with a single line, "I think you need to see this." By mid-afternoon, Sarah knocked on her office door with a pale face and a trembling voice. "It's worse than you think," she said, handing over a folder.
Hiring records, 5 years. Over 80% of minority candidates with advanced degrees were rejected before interviews. Internal promotions, blocked, especially for women. Elena opened the file slowly. It wasn't the shock that hit her. It was confirmation. She'd always felt it in the way they said her name, in the way security double-checked her badge, in the way a white male intern with a bachelor's degree had been handed a junior strategist role she'd applied for 3 times. Daniel Walker was waiting when she arrived at his office. He didn't sit. He didn't smile. He took the folder and turned page after page in silence, the only sound in the room the hum of the HVAC and the scratch of his pen. When he reached the last sheet, he looked up. "Call a board meeting," he said. "Tonight." It was the kind of sentence that doesn't sound dramatic, but in the mouth of a man who ran an empire, it meant blood. That evening, the executive auditorium filled with bodies that had never shared a room before, department heads, division leads, international partners,
even housekeeping staff. Everyone had been invited. No one knew why. The lights dimmed. A screen flickered on. It wasn't a presentation. It was a mirror. Side by side, Elena's resume and Ashley Whitmore's. Elena's rejections. Ashley's $48,000 translation invoices. A chart showing the number of qualified applicants by race. Approval and denial rates. Side-by-side photos of employees promoted versus those passed over. There were no dramatic accusations, just data. And silence. And the kind of stillness that forces men in suits to finally see the walls they've helped build. Daniel Walker stepped to the microphone. "We didn't just fail to promote talent," he said. "We actively buried it." Then he turned to Elena. "This woman," he continued, "has done more for this company in 3 days than some of us have done in 3 years." And for the first time in her life, Elena Reyes didn't flinch when every pair of eyes turned toward her. She stood, not as a symbol, not as a token, but as proof. Proof that the system knew her name all along. It just hoped she'd stay quiet. But she hadn't. And now, everything was about to change. She didn't speak first. She let the numbers speak for her. In the auditorium where polished shoes once clicked across the floor, privilege and titles were worn like armor, and silence settled like dust. Dozens of hotel staff, executives, and foreign delegates filled the rows, some with crossed arms, some with nervous glances, most not understanding why they had been summoned at such short notice. But the woman at the front of the room, Elena Reyes, stood steady, her hands resting lightly on a lectern that had never before held someone like her. The screen behind her came alive, not with slogans or corporate flair, but with evidence. Slide after slide. Data, rejection letters, salary comparisons, resume qualifications, names that had been erased, salaries that had been inflated. A 5-year pattern of race-coded exclusion wrapped in administrative procedure. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The truth was loud enough. One by one, the charts built their case. A Hispanic woman with a master's degree was denied 12 times. A black war veteran fluent in Mandarin is cleaning banquet floors. A Vietnamese housekeeper with 2 finance certifications was overlooked for a desk position, while the CEO's godson managed accounts without proper credentials. And then, Ashley Whitmore. Her name glowed cold on the screen. 0 linguistic training, 0 certifications, 3 government contracts, and over $120,000 paid out in under 3 years. Her only asset? Being the niece of Mr. Gallagher. The room stiffened. People shifted in their seats. On stage, Elena wore a muted blazer over a plain blouse. No name-brand jewelry, no bold prints, just quiet defiance. Her earrings were the same small gold hoops that once earned her warnings about looking too casual when she was scrubbing floor grout near the lobby chandelier. But today, no one questions them, because today, she held the room. The moment Mr. Gallagher entered, late and arrogant, the air shifted again. He walked with the ease of someone used to being untouchable, wearing a double-breasted suit and a silk pocket square that matched nothing except his delusion. He smiled toward the board. "I'm assuming this is about a misunderstanding?" Daniel Walker stood beside Elena, arms folded, face unreadable. He said nothing, yet. Elena turned calmly to the audience. "You were told I wasn't a good fit," she said. "That I lacked polish, that I didn't look the part." She paused. "But who decides what leadership looks like in America? A last name? A pair of pearl earrings? The color of a blazer?" The older members of the staff, the ones who had scrubbed kitchens, driven shuttle vans, and ironed bed sheets through arthritis and grief, leaned forward. They had seen versions of this for decades. Promotions that skipped them, compliments that felt like reminders, uniforms that kept them separate. A few nodded, eyes damp. Elena looked toward the crowd. "I was never invisible. I was erased." And then Walker spoke. He addressed the room not as a CEO, but as a man confronting his reflection. For years, we accepted the convenient lie that talent would rise on merit alone, he said, but merit has never worn the right shoes, or carried the right name tag, or looked the way we were told it should. He motioned to Gallagher. Today, Mr. Gallagher is terminated for cause. There was no gasp, just an inhale held tight across the room. He turned back to Elena. And Ms. Reyes. She met his gaze, not with awe, but with clarity. Is hereby appointed our permanent global director of multilingual relations, with authority to lead equity reforms across all departments. In the back row, a woman from housekeeping wept quietly. Her hands were still red from bleach. In the far corner, a bellhop with silver at his temples whispered, "About damn time." And on the screen behind them all, the final slide appeared. Not numbers or graphs, but a photo. A black and white image of a woman in a cleaning uniform from 1982, staring into the lens, proud and exhausted. It was Elena's mother. Beneath the photo, her daughter wasn't promoted to prove a point. She rose because no one could hold her down forever. That day, the room didn't just witness a promotion. They witnessed the beginning of a correction, a reckoning. And maybe, for the first time in the building's history, truth wore gold hoops and stood tall without needing to shout. The plaque on her door was smaller than expected, not gold, not backlit, just brushed steel, simple serif font. Dr. Elena Reyes, Vice President, Equity and Global Communication. No title on a wall could carry the weight of what it meant. Not really. Not after 6 years spent in silence, folding towels in the shadows of chandeliers. Not after being told, again and again, that her voice was too soft, her name too foreign, her earrings too prominent for the rooms where power made decisions in whispers. Now, she sat behind a desk once reserved for white men in tailored suits, watching the city flicker beyond the glass. But she wasn't thinking about titles. She was thinking about legacy. The cleaning badge her mother once wore was now framed on her bookshelf. It still smelled faintly of ammonia. Downstairs, in the very ballroom where she had once scrubbed spilled champagne beneath gilded tables, a conference was beginning. But this wasn't for CEOs or overseas partners. This was the launch of the Invisible Talent Initiative, a program Elena had designed to unearth the brilliance hidden in overlooked employees across the hotel chain, including housekeepers with MBAs. Kitchen staff are fluent in 4 languages, maintenance techs who once managed teams in war zones. She had lived the statistics. Now she would break them. The faces arriving that morning weren't glossy like corporate ads. They wore simple clothes, sensible shoes, Sunday best smiles mixed with uncertainty. Some still clutched their old ID cards, unsure if they were allowed to stand in a room with chandeliers and canapes. She made sure they were. Sarah Martinez stood at the podium, her voice clear and proud, introducing the program. But it was Elena who stepped up last, standing not as a symbol, but as a steward. She wore the same navy slacks and modest heels from the day she first walked into Walker's office. But this time, no one questioned the outfit. No one questioned the woman wearing it. "My mother," she began, "never made it into a room like this. She raised me to be quiet, to be grateful, to be cautious, because she believed, like so many others, that those were the rules if we wanted to survive." She paused. "But we didn't come this far just to survive. We came to build, and now we write new rules." She didn't cry, but others did. A former dishwasher wiped away tears as he stood beside a black single mother who had been promoted to regional coordinator after being passed over for 10 years. A bellhop in his 60s, who'd taught himself coding in secret, was now leading digital guest services. They hadn't been discovered. They'd been there the whole time. Elena only gave them the microphone. Later that day, she received a letter. a plain envelope from a nursing home in New Mexico. Inside was a photo of an elderly woman, her weathered hands folded in her lap, wearing a uniform with a stitched badge, La Esperanza Inn, 1981.
On the back, in careful handwriting, it read, "My name is Gloria Jimenez. I worked in hotels for 32 years and was never once asked if I had dreams. Watching you made me remember I still do." Elena closed the envelope and held it to her chest. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't a reparation. This was resurrection. Not just for herself, but for every name that had been misspelled, every voice told to wait, every woman with a scarf called unpolished, every man whose accent was mistaken for ignorance. Somewhere down the hall, laughter echoed. Not the nervous kind, the free kind. And Elena Reyes, once just a shadow in someone else's hallway, smiled quietly, knowing the most powerful thing she ever wore wasn't a badge or a blazer. It was the truth. And finally, it had a seat at the table. Some stories end with applause, others end with silence, because the truth hits too hard, too deep, too close to home. This wasn't just Elena Reyes's story. This was the story of every brilliant mind buried beneath a name tag, every fluent voice muted by uniform, every resume ignored because it didn't wear a silk tie. It's the story of systemic erasure, quiet, polite, calculated. But more than that, it's a story of return, of dignity recovered, voices reclaimed. We live in a world where perception still trumps truth, where worth is too often measured in skin tone, zip code, or whether your shoes click on marble or squeak down service stairs. But this story reminds us that true potential doesn't need permission to rise. It only needs someone to see it, and someone brave enough to speak when it's safer to stay silent. So maybe the real question now isn't, what would you do if you were Elena? Perhaps it's, who have you already overlooked in your world? The janitor with 2 languages in her pocket, the busboy who codes by night, the receptionist with a law degree pinned beneath a forced smile. Will you notice them now? If this story moved you, even a little, share it. Leave a comment below about someone who inspired you, or someone who deserves more recognition. We want to hear your voice, because storytelling only matters if it creates change. Subscribe to our channel to follow more stories like this, true stories that hold a mirror up to the world and quietly ask, are we better than this? Thank you for watching. See you in the following video.